This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, the editor-in-chief at FanDuel and at NumberFire.com, and this is episode 549 of the Late Round Podcast, with many shows that are part of the FanDuel Podcast Network. Thanks for tuning in. I know a lot of you are golf fans, so check this out. The Ryder Cup is right around the corner, and FanDuel and Callaway have joined forces to add an extra layer of excitement to one of the sport's biggest events. Introducing the Callaway Golf Pick'em Contest, a completely free-to-play contest that gives you a chance to showcase your golf knowledge. It's simple. Just answer 7 questions on Callaway-sponsored countries and players throughout the tournament and compete for a share of the $20,000 in cash prizes. Think you know how many matches Xander Schauffele will win throughout the tournament? Or what team will win the Ryder Cup? Head to FanDuel and prove it. For more details, visit FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel app today. Eligibility restrictions apply. The first trend this week is that the team with the lowest running back target share through 2 weeks is the Kansas City Chiefs. Fewer than 8% of their targets have gone to running backs. The team that ranks second to last, which is surprisingly Denver, is at 10.1%. Clyde Edwards-Helaire has not been good, but I would expect this number to rise a bit. Last season, Kansas City was 15th in the NFL in running back target share. They had a share of 18.6%. And for the record, the lowest running back target share since 2011 came from Indianapolis in 2012. They targeted their running backs on 8.3% of their targeted throws. In other words, this is a small sample size thing and good news for any of you who drafted CEH. I wouldn't consider him a buy, but I at least would feel comforted by the fact that he should be more involved as a receiver soon enough. There's been one team this season that hasn't run an offensive play while trailing. Any guesses? The Carolina Panthers. It'll be interesting to see what happens with this offense when it faces a negative game script. Overall, the Panthers have a 1.22 pass-to-rush ratio. That's lower than the league average. That jumps to 1.33 in neutral game scripts or when games are within 6 points. That's not surprising since they've had positive game scripts. When teams are winning, they tend to be more run-heavy overall because they can grind down clock. I wouldn't expect the Panthers to keep this up, so this trend could be beneficial for their pass catchers. Now, speaking of Carolina pass catchers, Robbie Anderson saw his target share bump up from 9.1% in week 1 to 17.1% in week 2. That's good to see. He wasn't as productive in fantasy because he had a long touchdown in week 1, but this is obviously a good thing for Anderson. And it was predictable. He wasn't going to see a 9% share throughout the season. What was interesting about Anderson's usage in week 2, though, was that according to Pro Football Focus, Anderson played 58% of his snaps from the slot. Terrace Marshall was at 79% in week 1. Anderson in week 1 was at 18%. That's at least something to monitor, since slot work can be different than perimeter work in terms of matchup and average depth of target. Trend 4 is that San Francisco has been a below average team in terms of tight end target share through 2 games. They've targeted their tight ends at about a 17% rate. The league average is closer to 20%. George Kittle has fortunately seen every single one of these targets. That's the good news. And I wouldn't expect this kind of trend to continue, especially this weekend against Green Bay. If you adjust target share allowed by opponent, team tight ends have seen a bump of about 7 percentage points in target share against Green Bay through 2 games. We saw TJ Hawkinson wreck them on Monday night, and the week before, the Saints duo was heavily involved. Expect a big bounce back this week from George Kittle. I wouldn't be worried about this next trend, but I just found it interesting. In week 2, DeAndre Hopkins saw an 11.8% target share. Okay, no big deal. He had a down game. Sometimes that happens. It does. It definitely does. But get this, and this speaks to DeAndre Hopkins' dominance through the years. That was DeAndre Hopkins' second lowest target share since 2014. That's absolutely insane, so I had to share it. Trend 6 is that Andy Dalton has thrown 1 pass this season that's traveled 15 or more air yards. That gives him a moderate to deep ball rate of just 2%. That's by far the lowest in the league. The player second from the bottom is Jimmy Garoppolo. He's thrown it deep on 7.5% of his throws. The current deep ball rate chart is actually pretty interesting. At the top of the list is Trevor Lawrence, who's thrown it 15 or more air yards on almost 30% of his attempts. Then it's Tom Brady, Russell Wilson, Derek Carr, and Baker Mayfield. At the bottom, you've got Andy Dalton and Jimmy G, which I just talked about, and then there's Dak Prescott. He's only thrown it deep on 8.2% of his throws, and it has to make you wonder if he's 100% or not. Since week 12 of last year, so over the last 8 regular season games, Marquise Brown has averaged a 33.7% target share per game. He's averaged a touchdown per game while scoring in all but one of those contests, and he's averaging 17.3 PPR points per game. That's all very impressive. I think it's important to still point out that Baltimore currently is once again the most run-heavy team in football with a pass rate under 43%. And they've been even more run-heavy in neutral game scripts. So in order for Brown to maintain these numbers, and last year 17 PPR points per game would have been a fringe wide receiver 1. In order for him to maintain these numbers, he's going to have to maintain some unsustainable numbers, both in target share and in touchdowns. I don't think he's a clear sell candidate though, because people aren't realizing how good Brown has been. This is one of those things to just be aware of if you have him, especially for when Rashad Bateman is healthy. Mike Williams is just one of 9 wide receivers with at least a 25% target share in each of the first 2 games. You know who's not on that list? Keenan Allen. Allen has now been outscored by Williams in each of those 2 games, and he's been out-targeted by 1 target. Now, I would still prefer Allen season long, but those of you who got Williams should be feeling pretty good. It looks like all the coach speak about Williams playing that major role in this Lombardi offense was very real. Speaking of the Chargers, let's talk about Justin Herbert. Over Herbert's last 8 games, he's given fantasy managers just 2 QB1 performances. During this stretch, 5 of his 8 games have resulted in 1 or fewer touchdown passes. Now, I don't think this is something that Herbert managers should totally panic over, but part of the issue with Herbert is that he's still just been a regular pocket passer. He has 11 rushing yards through 2 games. So if he's going to be fantasy relevant, he's going to need to escape the pocket more. Or he's going to have to bump up that touchdown rate. Over this stretch, his touchdown rate has only been 3.3%. If you get that to 5 or 6%, we're talking high-end QB2 type numbers and a very serviceable fantasy starter. And I think that should happen. So hold tight. I don't think a top 5 season is likely to happen, but I didn't really see that happening entering the year. He hasn't shown that rushing potential. So expect more low-end QB1 numbers or high-end QB2 numbers with Justin Herbert. We've got to talk about Ezekiel Elliott and Tony Pollard with this last trend. From week 1 to week 2, Zeke saw his running back rush share drop by about 23 percentage points. His target share rose by about 4 percentage points, but Tony Pollard was way more involved as a runner, and for the second straight week, he out-targeted Zeke. I think both players can be fantasy relevant this year. This isn't a situation where Pollard being there makes Ezekiel Elliott irrelevant, but he's absolutely stealing looks from him. And it's absolutely hurting Zeke's ceiling. This was my fear with Zeke in last week's 15 transactions episode and why I couldn't just go all in on buying him. I still think he can finish as a top 10 guy at the position, especially given an upcoming schedule where Dallas should see a lot of positive game scripts. But gone are the days where Zeke will see a huge target share in that offense. The dump-offs aren't there, and that's limiting him. And it's not helping his argument when Pollard just looks more electric with the ball in his hands. So I don't think Zeke is a sell, but this past week wasn't really good news for him. That's going to do it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you've yet subscribed to the Late Round Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter @LateRoundQB. Thanks for listening, everyone. Talk to you tomorrow.